Hello, my friend. Welcome to Dreamy Nights. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight we'll drift together into a peaceful story, one that feels like candlelight curling steam and the hush of mountain air. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let the day gently fall away. When you're ready, our story begins. Evening approached softly over the high ridges, as though the world itself were exhaling after a long and gentle breath. The sun had begun its slow descent, spilling threads of gold across terraces of stone and moss. Far below, the valley folded into mist, and above it all, the cloud lantern tea house stood with quiet grace, a wooden refuge cradled by pines and endless sky. Inside, Master Lin moved unhurriedly. His steps were light against the cedar floor, and his robe brushed faintly with each turn. He carried a small clay teapot in both hands, feeling the warmth pulse softly through it like the steady rhythm of a living heart. The sound of boiling water murmured nearby, a calm, constant whisper that filled the space like distant rain. He placed the teapot down upon a low table and lifted the kettle from the brazier. The copper lid trembled with tiny sighs of steam. He poured slowly, and the scent of roasted barley rose to meet him, earthy, toasty, and grounding. It mingled with the faint sweetness of pine resin, drifting through the open shoji screens. Outside, the sky was deepening from amber to rose, from rose to a tender indigo. Each movement was part of a rhythm he had known for decades. Rinse the cups, warm the pot, measure the leaves. He no longer thought about perfection. Instead, he listened. The water's tone, the tea leaves' soft rustle, the sigh of evening air through bamboo eaves. They guided his hands without command. A bell tinkled from somewhere beyond the veranda. It wasn't a doorbell, only a wind chime shaped like a small crane turning gently in the breath of the mountains. Master Lin looked toward it and smiled, as if greeting an old friend. Then he lit a single paper lantern. Its flame flickered once, twice, and then steadied, casting a honeyed glow that filled the tea house's heart. The benches along the veranda were empty for now. Visitors came and went without announcement, sometimes climbing the winding path from the valley below, sometimes arriving through a quiet gate from the neighboring ridge. Yet, even in solitude, Master Lin prepared as though company were near, for to him each evening was its own guest deserving of gentle welcome. He placed 3 porcelain cups upon the table, though he would drink alone tonight. The first cup was for the mountain, an offering to the mists that wrapped the world. The second was for the wind, to honor its ceaseless song. And the third was for memory itself, for all those who had once shared this same tea under the same fading light. He poured carefully into each. The steam rose, twisting and dissolving, turning visible thought into silence. He watched it drift upward, joining the lantern's halo before slipping away into the night air. Beyond the open screen, the mountain slope glowed softly in moonrise. Thin clouds traced silver lines between the pines, and the scent of moss after dusk carried an almost musical coolness. Master Lin leaned back on his cushion and listened. No words were needed. The mountain spoke in hushes, in the distant rustle of cedar boughs, in the faint tap of a bamboo ladle resting against stone. For a long while, he simply sat. The minutes stretched like silk, unbroken and smooth. He remembered a saying his teacher once whispered, "Tea is time steeped until the heart becomes still." And indeed, time here seemed to steep itself slowly, warmly, until the border between one breath and the next blurred into calm. Inside, the shadows began to move differently. The lantern light caught on the steam, making it shimmer gold, then fade again into quiet gray. The tea house creaked softly as the temperature fell. A sigh of settling wood. Master Lin placed his hands together in gratitude, feeling the subtle hum of the mountain beneath his palms. He rose only to open the shoji a little wider. The air that entered was crisp, laced with the faintest scent of jasmine from a pot by the veranda. Down below, a single lantern burned near the footpath, perhaps marking the path for a traveler still climbing the long stone stairs. He imagined their slow ascent, the rhythmic tap of sandals against stone, the promise of rest waiting at the top. He set another cup upon the table just in case. The tea house glowed like an ember against the cool sky. Its lanterns, suspended by thin cords, swayed gently, their light rippling across the polished floor. Within that quiet glow, the world felt distilled each moment, rounded, softened, and steeped in stillness. Master Lin breathed deeply, eyes half closed, his face serene. Beyond the tea house, the valley was fading into night. Above him, stars began to thread themselves into view. One, then another, then another, until the sky seemed filled with quiet fires. The kettle whispered again. He reached for it, refilled the pot, and smiled to himself. The second steeping was always softer, rounder, a kind of memory of the first. He poured, inhaled, and let the fragrance drift through the room. Each exhale seemed to fold the day a little further away, until only the sound of warm water remained. And then, for a moment, everything was perfectly still, the kind of stillness that feels alive like a heartbeat hidden beneath the silence. The mountains slept beneath a blanket of drifting mist, and the night had settled so completely that even the stars seemed to breathe in unison. The cloud lantern tea house stood like a quiet guardian above the valley, its light barely stirring the surrounding fog. Inside, Master Lin had not moved for some time. His teapot rested empty, now its clay surface cooling to the touch, and his gaze lingered on the horizon where moonlight traced the outline of distant peaks. A faint sound stirred in the stillness, the rhythm of soft footsteps upon stone. They rose from the stairway path below, unhurried, steady, like the approach of someone who already knew peace awaited at the summit. The faint tap of sandals blended with the sighing wind. Master Lin looked toward the entrance and smiled. A few moments later, a figure emerged from the fog, a traveler wrapped in a shawl, the color of pale dusk. Her hair shimmered faintly with dew, and her breath joined the mist in delicate ribbons. She bowed lightly in greeting, and Master Lin returned the gesture, his movements fluid as flowing tea. Without a word, he motioned toward a cushion near the veranda. The traveler sat resting her pack beside her knees. Her face was calm, though her eyes held the quiet fatigue of long journeys. The lantern light cast golden circles across the floorboards, and for a moment, neither spoke. Only the faint sound of the kettle returning to boil filled the room. Master Lin lifted it gently, the copper surface glowing like a miniature sunrise. He poured water into the small clay pot and watched the steam rise, curling around them like a living spirit. Then, in his low voice that carried the tone of evening rain, he said, "The mountain keeps its own time. Here, every cup begins again." The traveler nodded, her hands folded in her lap. She seemed content to listen, to let the rhythm of the tea ceremony unwind the lingering knots of the road. As he poured, the scent of jasmine and toasted rice drifted through the air, blending with cedar smoke from a small brazier near the wall. The sound of the pour was soft, steady, almost like the hush of a lullaby. They shared tea in silence. Each sip came slowly, as though measured not by thirst, but by breath. The traveler's shoulders eased, and the faint lines of weariness softened from her face. Beyond the veranda, the fog began to thin, revealing a scatter of village lights far below, trembling like reflections on water. Master Lin spoke again, his voice no louder than the steam itself. "Do you see those lights?" he asked. "They flicker like thoughts. Each one burns a while, then fades, and the mountain remains." The traveler smiled faintly, her eyes following the pattern of the lanterns in the valley. "It must be peaceful," peaceful," she whispered, "to live above the clouds." He nodded. "Peace is only a steeping, nothing more. We pour our days into time, and what remains is flavor." The kettle began to hum again, and he refilled her cup. This time the tea was paler, lighter in fragrance, a second infusion gentler, like the softened echo of a remembered song. The wind shifted outside, and the paper screens fluttered. From somewhere near the rafters came the quiet rattle of the crane-shaped wind chime answering the breeze with its delicate note. They sipped again. Master Lin's eyes drifted to the far end of the veranda, where the lantern path wound down into darkness. Each lantern along that narrow trail burned with its own quiet flame, and as the mist moved through the lights, seemed to float as if the mountain itself were dreaming. He thought of the years he had tended those lanterns, cleaning the glass, trimming the wicks, replacing the oil by hand. Each one a small prayer to endurance, to the gentle persistence of light. He had never counted how many steps the path held for to him. It was infinite, a ribbon of stillness connecting sky and earth. The traveler followed his gaze. "Do you walk it often?" she asked. "Every dawn," he replied. "Before the valley wakes, I light the first lantern and walk until I can no longer tell whether the mist is rising or I am descending into it. Then I return, and the tea tastes different, as if it knows the morning has begun." She closed her eyes, listening. The thought seemed to soothe her, to fold the world into something smaller, simpler, kinder. The tea house was filled now with a deep, rounded warmth, the mingled scent of tea, wood smoke, and night air. Beyond the veranda, the wind had calmed. The stars were clear again, and their reflections shimmered faintly in the lacquer of the table. Master Lin began tidying the table, his gestures slow and circular. He dried the pot with a folded cloth, its weave coarse and comforting beneath his fingertips. He set the cups in a line, their rims catching the lamplight. Everything found its place with quiet precision, as though the act itself were a conversation with the room. The traveler watched her breath steady. "I think," she said softly, "this is the first time today I have heard nothing ask for attention." Lin smiled. "Then the tea has done its work." They shared one final cup before the hour grew late. Outside, the mist had begun to lift entirely, revealing the faint edge of dawn light touching the horizon, though morning was still far away. For now, the mountain held them both in its calm embrace. The night undisturbed. Master Lin rose, walked to the veranda, and gently adjusted the nearest lantern. Its flame flickered, then steadied once more. Behind him, the traveler began to hum a tune, barely audible, more breath than melody. It mingled with the faint sound of the chime. And for an instant, everything within the tea house felt suspended between silence and song. He turned back toward her, his expression soft with gratitude. There he said quietly, "Now the mountain will remember your voice."
Anna.
The night drifted onward in its quiet rhythm. The world balanced between darkness and the first faint stirrings of dawn. In the cloud lantern tea house, the final lanterns still glowed softly, their paper sides breathing in and out with the gentlest movements of the mountain wind. The kettle's flame had grown small, a single orange ember whispering beneath the iron. Master Lin had fallen into meditation, his hands resting loosely upon his knees. Across from him, the traveler dozed beside her teacup, her shawl drawn lightly about her shoulders. There was no boundary between their stillness and the mountains. The hush seemed to connect everything in a seamless thread of peace. Outside, the mist began to thin. The stars retreated one by one, leaving behind a pale shimmer of silver light. The horizon stretched wide and patient, as if waiting for something gentle to arrive. Then from beyond the ridges, a faint blush of morning began to bloom, a breath of rose and lavender spreading across the sky. Master Lin opened his eyes. The light touched the wooden beams of the ceiling, the low tables and the teacups turning them the color of soft honey. He stood moving carefully so as not to wake his guest. The air was cooler now, carrying a delicate scent of damp earth and mountain moss. He slid open the shoji screens and stepped onto the veranda. The boards beneath his feet were cool, dew-kissed. From this height, the valley below appeared as a sea of clouds, layer upon layer of silver and white, swirling like the surface of a sleeping lake. Here and there, the roofs of small villages peeked through their chimneys, tracing thin streams of smoke into the sky. Master Lin took a deep breath. The new day arrived quietly, not with sudden light, but as a slow unveiling. The sound of distant bells carried up from the valley, faint, melodic, almost dreamlike. Perhaps it was the first bell of the temple, or perhaps only the echo of the mountain's own awakening. He returned to the brazier and rekindled the flame with a pinch of pine needles. The soft crackle filled the silence, and the air grew fragrant again. A small clay jar sat on the low shelf beside him, labeled in faded ink, "Morning Leaf Spring Harvest." He opened it gently and inhaled. Inside were delicate green curls of tea light and crisp as early sunlight. As the traveler stirred awake, Master Lin greeted her with a calm smile. "You've rested well," he said, pouring a ladle of water into the kettle. She blinked sleepily and nodded. I must have drifted off, she murmured, her voice drowsy, but it felt like dreaming with my eyes open. He chuckled softly. That is the mountain's way. It dreams for us when we grow too tired. Steam began to rise again, this time thinner, whiter, like the first threads of day weaving into the air. The tea steeped quickly, releasing a delicate scent of fresh leaves and spring rain. When he poured it, the color was pale jade, almost luminous in the dawnlight. They drank in silence, watching as the first true sunbeam broke over the far ridge. It touched the tea house with gold. The paper lanterns turned translucent, their soft shapes glowing from within. The mist shimmered like silk, and the valley below became a mirror for the sky. The world seemed to exhale long, slow, complete. The traveler placed her cup down gently. I think she said the world must be born anew every morning, but we only notice when we are still enough to see it. Master Lin smiled at that, and every evening it forgets again until the next steeping. She laughed softly, the sound blending with the call of a bird from somewhere near the ridge. The note hung in the air, pure and clean, like water falling into crystal. The day had begun, but the pace of it here was unhurried. There were no demands, no destinations, only the quiet companionship of tea and sky. After a time, the traveler rose and walked to the veranda's edge. Her shawl fluttered faintly around her as she gazed into the vastness below. The lantern path she had climbed last night was barely visible now, its flames extinguished by the pale light of dawn. Yet it remained beautiful in its silence, each lantern glass glistening with dew. Master Lin joined her carrying a small bundle of rice cakes wrapped in bamboo leaf. A simple breakfast, he said. Sweetness for strength and warmth for the road. They shared the food without hurry, savoring each bite. The cakes were soft and slightly sticky, with the faint taste of honey and toasted rice. The warmth of tea balanced the cool air, creating a sense of gentle harmony. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, the traveler turned to him. "Do you ever wish to leave this place?" she asked. Lin looked out across the endless valley, his eyes reflecting the soft shimmer of morning. "I once thought I might," he said slowly, "but the mountain has its own way of teaching patience. To stay is not to be bound. It is to see how stillness moves." She nodded understanding. The breeze carried the sound of the chime again, the same soft note that had welcomed her last night. It rang once, then faded, leaving behind the whisper of pine needles brushing against the roof. Master Lin began to tidy once more, stacking cups, folding cloths, sweeping the floor in wide, deliberate strokes. The traveler watched, memorizing the rhythm of it, the grace that came from repetition. She thought of her own travels, of countless roads and fleeting nights, and realized how rare it was to find a place where nothing needed to happen, yet everything felt whole. When the tea house was once again in order, Lin extinguished the brazier's flame and carried the kettle outside. He poured the remaining water onto the earth beside the veranda. Steam rose briefly, then vanished, merging with the mist that still clung to the pines. "The mountain gives," he said softly, "so we return what warmth we can." The traveler bowed deeply, gratitude shining in her tired but peaceful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the tea and for the silence." He inclined his head. "They are one and the same." The first bird chorus began to rise from the trees below, a soft gathering of chirps and trills that grew with the light. The day was opening like a flower petal by petal, and for a moment it seemed the world had forgotten every sharp edge it ever knew. Master Lin watched as the traveler gathered her shawl and began her slow descent down the lantern path. Each step disappeared into the mist until only the faint echo of her footsteps remained. He stood at the threshold for a long time, listening to the rhythm fade. Then, turning back inside, he lit a single stick of incense. Its smoke curled upward, steady and calm, carrying with it the soft fragrance of sandalwood and time remembered. The sun had fully risen, though, up here upon the cloud lantern tea house. It remained a muted gold, softened by high mist and distance. The mountain never rushed toward daylight. Instead, it let light wander gently through its folds, touching moss stone and the curved roofs of nearby shrines with patient affection. Inside the tea house, Master Lin moved through his morning routine. The bowls were washed. The cloths hung neatly to dry. The kettle refilled from a clay jar of collected rainwater. Each gesture flowed into the next without thought, like ripples in a pond. The quiet continued from the night before, not the silence of absence, but the silence of harmony, where every sound found its proper place. Beyond the veranda, the lanterns that lined the stone path had gone dim. Their paper sides shimmered faintly with dew, waiting to be tended. This was a task Master Lin cherished most, the tending of the lanterns, the 100 small suns that guided each traveler home to rest. He wrapped himself in his outer robe, pale gray and soft from years of wear, and stepped outside. The air met him cool and fragrant, laced with pine resin and the faint sweetness of blooming mountain plum. Each breath felt like an offering from the earth itself. The first lantern stood just a few steps from the veranda, its wooden post worn smooth by rain and touch. He opened the small glass door and reached inside with a folded cloth, wiping away the thin film of soot. Then he trimmed the wick and filled the small reservoir with oil. The motions were small, unhurried, as if the lantern were an old companion whose needs he understood. Without words, the mist around him shifted like breath. Somewhere deeper down the slope, a stream sang faintly, the same one that had supplied the tea house with water for decades. It was said that the stream began at a hidden spring near the peak and carried with it the memory of snow. Its song changed with the seasons, brighter in spring, slower in winter, yet always familiar. Master Lin moved from one lantern to the next, his hands steady, his steps soft. The work was meditative, and he found joy in its repetition. Each lantern was a pause in the path, a brief shimmer between steps. As he cleaned and filled them, he whispered small blessings, not as prayer, but as gratitude. The first light for travelers, yet unseen, he murmured, relighting the flame. The second, for those who have forgotten where they meant to go. The third, for those who no longer need to travel at all. The breeze responded in gentle agreement, brushing the flame to life. He smiled and moved on. By the 10th lantern, he paused to rest. The path curved here, revealing a view across the entire valley. Below, the clouds had thinned, and the fields appeared in mosaic shades of green and gold. Smoke rose lazily from distant homes where morning fires were being stoked for breakfast. He imagined the smell of millet porridge, the laughter of families beginning their day. Though he lived apart from the world below, he felt no distance from it, only connection, as if his stillness somehow balanced their motion. He sat on a flat stone beside the path and unwrapped a small parcel of dried fruit from his sleeve. The slices were sweet and chewy, made from persimmons gathered the previous autumn. Their flavor held the warmth of sunlight and the patience of time. With each bite, he sipped from a bamboo flask of cool tea brewed earlier that morning, now faintly chilled, tasting of memory more than heat. From here, he could see the outline of the traveler's descent, faint impressions of footsteps, still fresh in the dew. Soon, the sun would erase them, but for now, they shimmered like small vanishing echoes of gratitude. When he rose again, his movements had slowed even further. The mountain seemed to listen with him. A hawk circled far above its wings, carving silent arcs through the blue. The rhythm of life here was not in hours or minutes, but in breaths and motions, the steady pulse of existence unfolding without urgency. Master Lin reached the final lantern by midday. It stood at the very base of the path, near the stone gate carved with two simple words: Quiet Heart. He bowed to it, then knelt to tend its light. The lantern's glass was older, slightly fogged with age, but when polished, it caught the sunlight in soft brilliance. He adjusted the wick poured in the oil and waited a moment before lighting it. When the flame bloomed, it did so gently, a golden drop within the mist. He watched until it steadied, then leaned back, feeling the mountain's calm settle around him. He remained there for a long while, his eyes following the slow drift of clouds through the valley. A single cicada began its midday song, slow and rhythmic, echoing faintly among the rocks. Finally, he began the return walk upward. Each lantern he passed now burned anew, marking his ascent in intervals of warm, living light. The path felt different when walked this way, as if every step led deeper into silence, not away from it. At the top, he paused again by the veranda. The tea house waited, its doors open, its rooms filled with the scent of cedar and faint tea smoke. He entered quietly, closing the gate behind him. The stillness embraced him once more. Inside, he set down his oil flask, folded his robe neatly, and returned to the low table. On it lay the small clay teapot, empty but ready, as if it had been waiting for his return. He poured fresh water into the kettle and placed it over the brazier. Soon the soft murmur of boiling rose again, steady and familiar. He opened a tin marked Twilight Oolong, the leaves dark and fragrant, with hints of roasted chestnut and wildflower. As he measured them, he thought of the traveler who had left at dawn, how her voice had mingled with the wind, how her steps had disappeared into light. He hoped the mountain's peace followed her wherever she went. When the tea was ready, he poured the first cup for the room itself, a small ritual of gratitude. The second cup he placed near the open screen, letting the wind taste it. The third he sipped slowly, closing his eyes as the flavor spread like warmth through his chest. The mountain answered only in silence, but to him it felt like a conversation continuing across lifetimes. The light of midday softened into a kind of golden hush, spilling through the shoji screens in pale ribbons. The cloud lantern tea house glowed as if lit from within its wood, warmed by the gentle hand of the sun. Outside, the mountain exhaled mist and light, together weaving them into a tapestry that shimmered in the still air. Master Lin sat at his low table once more, his teacup resting before him. The steam curled upward, delicate as a breath in winter. He had finished his tending the lanterns, all glowing faintly even in daylight, small promises waiting for the evening's return. His robe hung neatly by the door, drying in the faint breeze that carried the scent of pine and the distant song of water. The mountain was quiet now, wrapped in the drowsy calm of afternoon. Somewhere far below, perhaps, in the valley's small town, bells might be chiming to mark the hour, but their sound was too soft to reach this height. Only the murmur of wind through bamboo and the occasional call of a bird remained. Master Lin poured another cup of twilight oolong, the amber tea catching the light like melted gold. The aroma was deep and round roasted grain, soft smoke, and a hint of dried fruit. He sipped slowly, each swallow a meditation, each taste an echo of patience. The warmth spread through him, and his breathing matched the rhythm of the mountain. After a while, he rose and opened the shoji screens wider. The air that entered was cool and edged with the faint sweetness of wild honeysuckle. Beyond the veranda, the valley stretched in quiet color, a watercolor of greens, ochres, and pale grays brushed by the drifting clouds. The world seemed to pulse with life, but not movement. Everything alive, yet still. On a low shelf near the doorway sat a zither, its strings a little dusty, though well kept. Master Lin brushed his hand across it gently, and the faint vibration of sound filled the room. He smiled, remembering when he used to play in the evenings, not for music's sake, but to guide the rhythm of the tea's pour. Each note like each drop part of a single gesture. He took his seat again and tuned the strings softly. The sound was pure, round like drops of rain falling on still water. As he plucked the first few notes, the air in the tea house seemed to pause listening. The melody was slow, only a few tones, rising and falling in the space between breaths. It felt less like a song and more like the memory of one. The mountain responded in kind. The wind carried the notes down the slope through the trees where they mingled with bird song and the hum of insects. Somewhere beyond, perhaps, a passing wanderer might hear the faint tune and imagine it was part of the mountain's own voice. When the melody faded, Master Lin set the instrument aside. The silence that followed was even more musical, complete, whole, tender. He felt the warmth of the sun upon his face and closed his eyes, letting the moment steep. After some time, he stood and walked toward the small storage alcove at the back of the tea house. Inside were shelves filled with jars, teas of many kinds. Some gathered from distant hills, others gifts from travelers long gone. Each was labeled in Lin's steady hand with names such as Moon Harvest, Dawn Mist, and Quiet Blossom. He touched each jar lightly as he passed, like greeting old friends. He chose one small jar near the top. Its label faded to near invisibility. He opened it and inhaled. The leaves within were silvery green, slender as feathers. Their scent was gentle and nostalgic white tea, with notes of pear blossom and cool rain. This was tea for reflection, he thought. Tea for quiet afternoons, when the heart sought no answer at all. He set the kettle again and waited. The water began to murmur, and he listened, hearing not just the boil, but the entire conversation of steam. Its rise, its release, its vanishing. When the first bubbles reached the surface, he removed the lid, allowing the sound to soften. He poured a measure into the pot, and the leaves began to dance. As he poured the tea into a delicate porcelain cup, the fragrance unfolded light clean with the faint sweetness of mountain air. He took a sip. The taste lingered like a sigh, subtle and soothing. Each swallow carried a different memory of mornings spent watching snow drift, of evenings filled with moonlight and silence, of old friends whose names had faded into the mist. He placed the cup down and looked toward the veranda again. The light had shifted. The sun now touched the far ridge, and the valley shimmered in a haze of gold. The mist had gathered once more, rolling upward like breath. It wrapped around the tea house, gently dimming the edges of the view, making the world smaller, closer, safer. Master Lin leaned back, resting his hands on his knees. The mountain sleeps in cycles, he thought. Even daylight dreams. The wind moved through the chimes again, the same delicate crane shape singing its simple note. He let it ring once, then fade. The sound seemed to echo through his chest, resonating with something wordless, the feeling of time passing kindly. In the distance, the stream could still be heard, winding through rocks and ferns. Its tone had deepened since morning the sun's warmth, changing its voice. Master Lin listened, hearing the steady rhythm and recognizing it as familiar as breath itself. He smiled. All things repeat, he murmured, and yet they are never the same. He rose once more and stepped outside. The veranda boards were warm now, under his bare feet. The lanterns gleamed faintly beside the path, each one holding a quiet pulse of light, even in the day's brightness. They would burn stronger once the sun began to fall. Master Lin stood at the edge and looked up toward the sky. A single cloud drifted above, shaped like a curved teacup, tipped toward the horizon. He bowed, slightly amused by the sky's small humor. Then he turned back inside, where the air was fragrant with tea and cedar. He sat again at the table, lifted his cup, and whispered a simple blessing, not spoken aloud, only breathed gratitude for warmth, for stillness, for time, steeped into peace. Outside, a soft wind rose, carrying the faint scent of rain far below the mountain where the world was preparing for evening. As the afternoon slipped quietly toward evening, the mountain began to change its tone. The gold of daylight thinned to silver. The air cooled and grew fragrant again, with the resin of pine and the faint sweetness of damp earth. Shadows lengthened like slow brushstrokes, drawing calm shapes across the veranda of the cloud lantern tea house. Inside, Master Lin tidied the space in unhurried rhythm. He folded the linen cloths, placed the teacups back into their small lacquered boxes, and swept the floor with slow arcs that caught the last slants of sun. The tea house creaked softly with the temperature's change, its timbers sighing like a body easing into rest. He moved toward the open screens and paused. The light beyond was astonishingly soft, a pale rose dissolving into blue, with the first thin edge of the moon already visible above the distant ridges. Beneath that sky, the valley was filling once more with mist, a gentle tide of cloud flowing upward to kiss the base of the mountain. Master Lin filled the kettle again and set it upon the brazier. He added a small piece of sandalwood to the coals. The smoke curled upward, carrying with it a scent both warm and sacred. The water began its quiet conversation. He prepared a new blend, one he reserved only for dusk evening amber, a mixture of roasted oolong and wild chrysanthemum. Its fragrance was deep honeyed, touched with a whisper of smoke. As the water met the leaves, steam unfurled across the table like a silken ribbon. The sound of the pour filled the room, a steady, delicate rhythm that seemed to slow the heart itself. Lin inhaled the scent, wrapping around him like a familiar song. He poured one cup, then another, though only one was for drinking. The other sat, untouched, placed for the mountain to share. He took the first sip. The flavor was mellow, grounded roasted chestnut sweet grass, the faint echo of distant flowers. It lingered long after swallowing, the warmth radiating outward through his chest. The tea house felt smaller now, intimate its walls, breathing with quiet life. From somewhere along the path, a bell chimed softly, the traveler's bell, perhaps still swaying in the night wind. It sang its single tone again and again, patient as heartbeat. Lin smiled, imagining it carried her peace into every place she might rest tonight. He stepped outside onto the veranda. The sky above him had turned indigo, threaded with early stars. The first lanterns had begun to glow along the path, tiny suns rekindled by the breath of evening. Each light shimmered through the mist, creating the illusion of floating orbs suspended between worlds. Lin walked slowly along the veranda rail, trailing his fingertips over the smooth wood. He stopped where the corner met the open air, his favorite place to stand. From here, He could see the whole sweep of valley and sky, a boundless horizon drawn in shades of silence. He remembered the words his teacher once spoke long ago, when he was still a young apprentice, learning to listen more than to act. To pour tea is to draw the shape of the moment. Nothing more, nothing less. He understood now that each pour was not only about the liquid or the vessel, but the attention given, the patience extended, the quiet shared. He lingered there for a while, the cup warming his palms. The sound of crickets had begun to rise from the slopes below, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby written for the mountain alone. Somewhere nearby, a small owl called once, then fell silent again. Every sound belonged, nothing intruded. Back inside, the lanterns in the tea house glowed brighter. Their paper skins caught the light like petals, each one slightly different in shade: cream, ivory, pale gold. Lynn trimmed their wicks and adjusted their placements, creating a slow rhythm of radiance across the room. The last of the day's light slipped away completely. In its place came the deep, silvery glow of moonrise. Lynn's eyes softened. His breath steadied. The night was arriving gently, as if it too had learned from the patience of the mountain. He set a new cup on the table and reached for the zither again. Its strings were cool beneath his fingertips. He played not to perform, but to listen, to weave sound into the fabric of the hour. The notes were lower now, slower, falling like petals into water. The melody wound around the flicker of lanterns and the hum of the kettle, joining them into a seamless quiet. When the last tone faded, Lynn closed his eyes. He could feel the night pressing close, soft and protective. The scent of chrysanthemum lingered in the air. It mingled with cedar smoke and the faint mineral breath of mist. He rose and stepped outside again. The moon had climbed higher now, bathing the path in silvery calm. Every lantern shimmered like a small heartbeat against the dark. The world below was invisible, replaced entirely by drifting cloud. It felt as though the tea house floated in the heavens. He poured the final cup of tea and placed it on the veranda rail where the moonlight touched its surface. The steam rose upward, curling toward the stars, dissolving into night. Lynn bowed his head slightly and whispered, "For the unseen guests." He lingered a while longer, watching the steam fade until only the warmth in his hands remained. Then, with slow grace, he returned inside, dimmed the lanterns to a low glow, and sat once more before the quiet brazier. Outside, the chime swayed softly, and the mountain exhaled. The hour had become timeless, suspended between breath and dream. The mountain held its breath beneath the moon. Silver light poured softly across the cloud lantern tea house, tracing the edges of roof tiles, the curve of the veranda rail, the faint shimmer of dew collecting on the lantern glass. Everything seemed poised between stillness and sleep. Inside, Master Lin sat by the brazier, eyes half closed, his hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. The embers glowed like tiny suns beneath the iron grate, fading slowly, sighing softly. Beyond the screens, the sound of night insects rose and fell, weaving a gentle rhythm that felt as ancient as the mountain itself. He had not spoken for hours. There was no need. The silence had become a companion patient and kind, like a visitor who asked for nothing but presence. The tea house smelled of warm cedar and chrysanthemum touched by the faintest trace of smoke. Then, from somewhere beyond the ridge, came a new sound, faint, soft, tentative at first. The hush of rain. It arrived as though it had been walking toward the mountain all evening, only now reaching its gentle destination. Lin listened, and his lips curved into a small smile. The rain was light, like a whisper across silk. It tapped upon the roof in irregular patterns, paused, and then began again, steady and slow. He stood and opened one of the screens just wide enough to let the fragrance in. The air that entered was cool and delicate, carrying the scent of wet pine and stone. The mist thickened once more, blending seamlessly with the falling rain, until the entire world beyond became a soft blur of silver. Lin lifted the kettle and refilled it, the sound of pouring water now harmonizing with the rain. Steam met steam, and the two became indistinguishable, earth and sky breath, and heat blending into one. The flames beneath the brazier flickered gently, their glow mirrored in his eyes. He reached for a different jar, moonleaf, a tea he rarely brewed, reserved for nights like this. Its leaves were dark and slender, with a scent of violet and faint cocoa. A tea meant for listening rather than drinking. He measured a small portion, poured the water slowly, and let the tea steep as the world outside softened further into hush. The rain fell harder for a few minutes, then gentled again, as if it too understood the pace of the tea house. Each drop upon the roof joined 1,000 others, forming a quiet symphony that filled every space without intrusion. Lin closed his eyes and listened. The sound was deep, soft, endless, like the memory of a lullaby, half forgotten, yet perfectly known. He poured the tea and held the cup close to his face. The aroma was sweet and earthy rich, but never sharp. As he sipped, the warmth spread through him, in slow, widening circles. The taste was unlike the others, heavier, but also soothing, like warmth folded into velvet. It reminded him of all the nights he had watched rain fall from this same spot, each one slightly different, each one carrying the same peace. The lanterns outside flickered faintly in the wind. Rain pooled along the edges of the veranda, and droplets fell with measured rhythm into the small garden stones below. The path of lanterns down the slope shimmered now, each flame blurred by the curtain of rain. The mountain seemed to dissolve into itself, outlines melting into mist sound, replacing shape. Lynn took another sip, then leaned back, resting one hand upon the table. "The mountain drinks too," he whispered softly. "Even silence must thirst." He remembered his teacher's final evening long ago, when he had still been learning the patience of tea. It had been raining then as well, and his teacher had said, "Listen, Lynn. There is no difference between the sound of rain and the sound of water poured. Both teach the same lesson. All things fall gently when they have nowhere else to go." Lynn smiled at the memory, warmed by its tenderness. Outside, a small stream of water trickled down from the roof edge, creating a clear tone as it struck the basin below. He could almost imagine it was the voice of the mountains speaking back to him. He sat for a while longer, breathing in rhythm with the rain. His mind drifted like cloud, not toward thought, but away from it. The edges of his awareness softened until even his heartbeat seemed to echo faintly with the falling drops. The scent of the tea changed as it cooled, growing rounder, earthier, like the soil after rain. After some time, he rose and stepped onto the veranda. The wood was slick beneath his feet, cool but not cold. The rain brushed against his sleeves as he moved to the railing. From here, the view was nothing but mist and shadow, but it was beautiful in its obscurity, the kind of beauty that existed only when seen through softness. He placed his empty cup upon the railing, letting the rain fill it slowly. The drops fell inside one by one, creating a gentle melody of hollow notes. He watched the water rise, then lifted the cup again, offering it outward into the night. "For the mountain," he whispered, "for the rain that returns." Then, turning back toward the tea house, he noticed how the lantern light reflected upon the wet floor, shimmering alive as if each droplet carried its own small sun. The entire veranda glowed not from brightness, but from the patient gleam of moisture holding light. He went inside and closed the screen halfway, leaving just enough of an opening for the sound to continue. He refreshed the brazier with another small handful of coals, and their orange glow painted the walls in calm motion. He refilled his cup, though not to drink, only to hold. Its warmth rested against his palms like the steady heartbeat of the mountain itself. The rain eased to a fine drizzle. The crickets resumed their quiet song. Somewhere deep in the valley, a single bell chimed the late hour, its tone long low fading. Master Lin exhaled softly. The night had deepened into its most peaceful self, and he could feel sleep moving through the air, waiting to descend gently over the mountain. He placed his cup down, folded his hands together, and bowed his head toward the open night. The rain answered with a single soft drop against the wood, as if acknowledging his gratitude. The tea house breathed again, and everything returned to stillness. The rain faded by degrees, not stopping so much as dissolving into mist. The droplets that had gathered on the eaves now fell one by one, each landing with a faint tick against the stones below. The cloud lantern tea house seemed to hover in that sound, half a sigh, half a dream. Above it, the moon reappeared through thin veils of cloud, pale and patient. Master Lin sat where he always did in the late hours beside the brazier, whose coals were now no more than faint orange threads. The kettle gave a low hum, a sound like breathing. He could smell damp cedar and sweet smoke, the aroma that marked every ending here. He poured the last of the hot water into the clay pot, though only a few leaves remained. They unfurled slowly, releasing a faint ghost of their earlier scent. The steam rose pale and tender, curling toward the lantern light, as if reluctant to vanish. This final tea was not meant for taste, but for closure, the last warmth of the day, given shape in fragrance. Outside, the night was utterly still. The valley below had disappeared beneath a seamless layer of cloud glowing faintly from the hidden moon. The path of lanterns shimmered like a constellation drawn upon the mist, each one alive with its own small heartbeat of gold. Lin gazed at them, and his thoughts moved without effort, slow as drifting vapor. He thought of the traveler who had shared tea that morning, of her quiet smile, and the lightness that came over her as dawn broke. He imagined her now asleep somewhere in the valley, perhaps dreaming of lanterns or rain. He was glad the mountain had offered her its calm. He rose, moved to the veranda, and looked down at the glowing path once more. The rain had polished the stones until they mirrored the light. The air was cool, gentle, fragrant with wet moss and the faint perfume of jasmine blooming late in the season. The mist brushed against his robe like breath. At the edge of the veranda stood the cup he had left earlier, now filled with clear rainwater. Moonlight shimmered on its surface. He lifted it carefully, raised it in quiet salute to the sleeping world and poured it out over the railing. The water fell soundlessly into the mist, returning to the mountain that had given it. Lin watched the steam fade from his own cup, its warmth finally giving way to the cool of night. He placed it down beside the kettle and sat again cross-legged on the tatami mat. His breath slowed, his mind softened. He could hear the tiny movements of the tea house wood expanding, settling, sighing. Every sound seemed to carry meaning, though no words were spoken. He remembered the first time he had come here decades ago, when his teacher still lived, when he had been restless, seeking mastery in every motion. He had believed that stillness was something to earn. Now, after all these years, he understood stillness was not an achievement, but a return. It was the mountain, the mist, the tea, all waiting patiently for one to stop moving long enough to join them. The lantern flames flickered lower. Their light painted the floor in ripples as though the tea house itself floated upon quiet water. The scent of sandalwood deepened, then thinned again. Time no longer measured itself in moments, but in breaths. Lin reached for the zither once more. He did not pluck it, only rested his hand upon its strings. The vibration of the night passed faintly through the wood, a hum of existence that needed no melody. It was enough to feel the resonance. After a long while, he rose for the final ritual. He moved to each lantern within the tea house, bowing slightly before extinguishing its flame. The first went dark, then the next and the next, each one fading gently into the embrace of moonlight. When only one remained, the lantern nearest the door, he paused. Its flame trembled, reflected in his eyes. "You may rest too," he whispered, and with a gentle breath, the light went out. The room became a pool of quiet silver. Only the coals in the brazier glowed faintly, small embers, like the last memories of the day. He sat again by the open screen. The mist had drawn close enough to touch, filling the room with its cool breath. Far below, a single light flickered in the valley, perhaps a lamp left burning by someone who also could not yet sleep. Lin smiled. The world was wide, yet joined by these small flames of care. He lifted the teapot one last time and poured the final drops into his cup. The tea was thin now, almost clear, but he drank it with gratitude. The warmth reached him softly, spreading through his chest until his body and the air seemed to share one temperature, neither warm nor cool, simply balanced. Then he leaned back, eyes drifting closed. The rain began again, light intermittent, as if to cradle him toward rest. The sound mingled with the whisper of his breathing. Each drop fell slower than the one before, until even the rhythm became dreamlike. His final thought before sleep was neither word nor image, only the feeling of being steeped in time itself, dissolving into the mountain's endless calm. The mist wrapped around the tea house. The lanterns below shimmered faintly, their reflections mirrored in the pooled rain. The night deepened, then grew utterly still, and in that stillness, every leaf, every beam, every breath of the mountain seemed to rest.